Okay, we're live, I believe. I'm just going to start us here. Uh, Instagram is supposed to catch in. Let me just get that going as
No problem.
well. There we go. All right, we're streaming on multiple platforms around the planet simultaneously. Isn't that phenomenal? Hi, Andrew. Good to have you
Good
here
evening.
in the studio.
Absolutely. Thanks for
I've been
having
waiting
me.
a while to say that. Yeah, thanks for coming to the studio. Wow. How was your day? We'll just start it off with that because we live in the same city. So for viewers tuning in, Andrew and I just live across the same city. So an unusual thing in our world because for the most part, I work with people all over the planet. And I think I know exactly one person, you, in the same city as me. So how was your Sunday in Kelowna?
It was good. It was very eventful. We definitely took advantage of the weather. A little bit of a warmer day, and we did some sledding as well. So it was good fun.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that. I told you earlier I went to the pool with my son and swam and slided. That was a good day too. So I'm glad you could join us here. We're going to go a little bit deeper, of course, beyond what we did in our day today. The overarching conversation that I wanted to have with you, and the reason I invited Andrew to join me is because over the years I do hear about the impact that deep coaching or deep transformational coaching, the form of coaching that we teach at the center, the impact that it has on our students, because I can see that in the classrooms over the course of the 6 months, 8 months, the year that they spend with us learning this approach. I can see the developmental change. What I don't always get to see so readily is the impact that it has beyond that on you as a coach, and then that impact into the work that you do as a coach. So this is the piece that I'm looking forward to kind of exploring with you today. So hearing how the work's impacted you, of course, and then beyond that, what you're noticing with the people that you work. So just some background on Andrew. He is a professional coach, as am I. He has been studying now. I would not say just studying, but you've been practicing and studying for how many years total?
Oh, 4.5 now.
Well, four and a half years.
Yeah, I would say I started on the adventure of coaching in about September of 2019.
Okay. So about 4.5 years or so.
Hmm.
And recently you've actually really amped up your commitment to it. Let's put it that way, because you have stepped into coaching full time.
Yes, yes, it has
That's
been,
huge.
yeah, I mean, there's no necessarily a comparison, to it, but in my mind, there's sort of a feeling of like, oh, this took 4 years, to sort of make that transition, and sort of the building up. But, as I reflect back on it now, I think even, you may have shared with me, it's like, oh, 4 years is not that long, to be able to make such a shift in terms of career into having this be a full-time thing.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people who are in the coaching industry can appreciate just how hard it is to create a living for yourself. And to, again, a little more context, Andrew has a family with young kids, and there are always, certain financial responsibilities that come with that. And it is by no means an easy journey to building a flourishing coaching practice. So the fact that, as you said, after 4 or 5 years in the industry, you're already able to make that commitment to yourself and to be able to step in full time, that is actually huge. That is huge. And it's worth, acknowledging and celebrating, because a lot of people I know are part-time coaches. They mix coaching in with a lot of different modalities. For example, they might do training and organizational development or facilitation. They kind of mix it all together. But you're really saying, I'm really all in for coaching. Good
Yeah,
for you.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, I mean, it's early, it's early in the process of making this a full-time thing, but there's also just a level of impact, a spaciousness, the time that I actually get to spend, devoting myself to the art of coaching now that, wasn't there before. And so, again, even in the early stages, it's really exciting. It's really exciting to be
Yeah.
able to be somebody that can bring more of this beautiful work to the world.
Yeah. And you work primarily with men. So you're the founder of a community, let's put it that way, called No More Mr. Nice Guy. And you work primarily with men. And I want to explore that a little bit with you today. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One is, again, just looking at kind of at the demographics of people that generally come to coaching. The demographics usually fall out something like 70% women, 30% men. Certainly in the center, in terms of those who come for the deep coaching intensive, it has often been in that neighborhood as well. And I'm not going to sit here and kind of speculate as to why all of that is, but it's more to say you were drawn to deep coaching on a personal level, and you're taking this to men. And I'm wanting to hear more about this as we go through, because there is an element of spirituality in deep coaching. There's a deep element of kind of being over doing, and men are often very drawn to a more doing type, like a more active kind of form of coaching or approaching life. And there's also a real need for extreme self-honesty and vulnerability in those who go through this kind of work. And again, just to hear that not only you are attracted or resonating with this work and are willing to, and have been doing for some time now through the center, kind of opening yourself up to that, but also bringing that to the men in your coaching community. So paradoxically, you're one of the nicest guys I know, and yet here you have the No More Mr. Nice Guy community. So obviously, it's not just about being a nice guy or not being a nice guy. So let me know a little bit about the men that you work with then, and what they're
Yeah.
seeking.
Yeah, so the first thing I'll share is actually, so No More Mr. Nice Guy is a book written by an author named Robert Glover. And he, I would say, so he released this book called No More Mr. Nice Guy around 2005. And it's one of the, I would say, one of the most well-known books in sort of the men's personal development space. And there, so where I sort of sit in this is that I did a coach training program with him and realized that there wasn't any presence on social media. And so that was really the opportunity there for me, was to really, continue this work in a different domain, a place maybe where, Robert Glover wasn't promoting his work. So, and then to come to, your question, I mean, the idea of a nice guy is, I would say it's a fairly modern term, because the as we look at sort of men historically, even pre-industrial age, right? The idea is that the man was on the farm. There was sort of a close knit connection between friends and family, males bonding together. And as we've gone into 20th 21st century, that a lot of that men's connection, the community, has been lost. We're seeing more single family households or divorced households where men and boys, they're alone. They're really
Mm,
alone in this world, navigating the world. And my opinion of it is like, so there's been this sort of transition of men in the world. There's a lot of different, mentalities and perspectives on masculinity now. And my belief is that men are also becoming much more conscious. They're really, wanting to be mindful of their impact of the world. And I think that is where I see the gift of coaching, is that to be able to create a space with men who traditionally don't have a lot of support structures, and to be able to be held in a space where they can be seen and heard and cared for, but also potentially challenged or like stood for. It's a powerful experience, and So that's a big part of why I'm drawn to working with men in this capacity, is because I know I need it. I definitely need these support structures, and I've gone through my own journey of, being in a real dark time, a real place of darkness, and stepping on stepping on the path and going through my own journey, that I get to be, we'll call it a guide, a somebody who can be there for others who are opening up, who are awakening to that same path as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe you can talk a little bit then about your journey. Okay.
Yeah.
Just in this in sense, when you say my journey, what that has been for you as a man, but also just as a human being. Like, and yeah, take us into that a little bit.
Yeah. So, I would say, um, it's kind of like, where do I start? I mean, I had a pretty rough childhood growing up. Um, just a lot of struggles within in our home. My parents split up early, and there's mental illness in my family. There were avenues where we dealt with poverty as well. Not way down on the depths of poverty, but definitely on the poverty line.
Mhm.
And so these were all things that were sort of in my world as I was, kind of entering high school and then kind of leaving high school as well. I think that the thing that really came out of that, though, is I was very much connected to positivity and possibility, like leaving high school. I really saw the world in this, um I would say, how would I explain it now? Like, there was a little bit of like just youthfulness there. I
Mm.
really didn't know the world at that point that I thought I did. And then as I went into my 20s, there were things that happened that really hit me hard. Well, and I think, as I was on this path of going into law enforcement, and I worked in the corrections department. So I started working in the prison system here in Canada at about the age of 22. And so, unfortunately, that was sort of my, like, stepping into adulthood, was working in the prison system as an officer. And I saw a lot of darkness, I would say, in that sort of
Mhm.
part of the world. But what I also experienced was being in that, that world. It actually started to, like, seep from my purpose. Like, I I felt like I had so much potential, and the things that I was wanting to create in the world just weren't really happening. I was sort of in this environment. And so it was really a hard period of time, because I felt like, okay, here I am. I have all this potential in the world, and I can't escape the situation that I'm
Right.
in. And so there was times where, I isolated. I played lots of video games, and I think that the thing is like, it's sort of one of those typical situations where somebody would probably have looked at me and thought, like, hey, this guy has a pretty normal life. Like, he's a functioning individual. He's a pretty happy person. But, like, on the inside, I was really struggling. And it was like that for quite a while. And again, like, when I think about, what didn't I have? I didn't have the support of other men. I didn't have people that really, I could talk to and really share what my experience was. I had friends, I had coworkers, but there were not individuals that could really help me start to unpack some of the things that were happening in my life.
Was your father around?
So no, so my dad, actually, he had a mental illness, and so probably about the time that I was 20, he started going really downhill. So even before that, I mean, in my high school years, definitely more there. Like, he was a presence, but it was um, not a father figure, we'll call it, right? He wasn't sort of teaching me the ropes of life. And then by the time I was 20, his mental illness had impacted him so much that it was almost like a role reversal. I was supporting him, and the support, he was not in a fatherly role at that point.
Yeah. And how did that impact what you were referring to as your struggle? If you could name that struggle,
Hmm.
and I don't know if this was related to, the upbringing you had, but what if you could characterize it, was the struggle?
Well, I mean, I think simply there was not a masculine role model in my life. I mean, and it's not to take away that from the people that were, who supported me along the way. There's been some great males who supported me in those times, but you know, really, as I reflect on my life, a lot of it I kind of had to figure out on my own. And
Yeah.
as I look back on that now, it's a pretty hard position to be in as a, you know, um, just as a lifetime thing to sort of like not have the masculine presence, the masculine leadership to guide me in my own life. It's almost like if I was to sort of be removed from the situation with my boys right now, they'd be in a similar dynamic.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly, and your boys are still very young, so there's
Hmm.
and, the ties to you are profound, and even if it's not something you can visibly see all the time, that if your removal was suddenly you were suddenly removed from their life, it would be absolutely life-changing in ways, you know, can't even imagine. So I can understand what you're going through. So I'm just trying to get an understanding then, because at some point you come into coaching. I mean, at some point you're in the correctional system. You bump into this thing called life coaching. Now, when you first heard about that, what was your kind of take on it? Was it this immediate like, oh, that's it. I'm going to go that way. So how did you first encounter it, and what were some of your initial thoughts
Yeah.
around its potential for you?
So I'll speak to one event that happened to me, before I kind of found the pathway to coaching. Um, so there was a moment when my first son was born, Noah, probably in week 1 or 2, where I was still pretty, just checked out in life, and there was a night that I specifically remember where like I was so excited to play this video game that, to be honest, I was like, oh, I can't wait for my wife and my son to go to sleep. I was still showing up, taking the early mornings to be there, but like this was the priority for me, was to like sit down and play this game. And there was a moment, probably like day 2 of this occurrence happening, where I literally, this sort of feeling came up of like, is this the life that you want to live? Right? Like there's literally like there's sort of 2 paths here. One path is you continue doing what you're doing and you'll live a normal life. You'll live the sort of average life. Um, and that's what'll be created. And there was this other side of me that was like, or you get to be a role model for your kid. You get to be a role model for your son, that no matter the circumstances that you've been through, there's an element of creating a life for yourself. And then, again, this was sort of this showing up for me. And that was so that moment. And then there was a pretty big moment at the correctional facility that I worked at, where there was a whole political thing that happened and a bunch of officers got fired. And it would have been a situation that likely if I was there working that day, I would have been fired as well, just for the circumstance. And so those sort of 2 pinnacle things happened where I was like, again, on this path of, if I live sort of the average predictable life, my life is going to be run by others. Like there's going to be this influence on my life, or this is the opportunity to start to take charge of where I want to go. So that happened in about 2017. And then, so that path started to be created. I ended up shifting out of the corrections department into a sales and marketing role. And that was all developing. Now, the really interesting thing about the coaching side of things was about the end of 2018, I discovered a book called Psycho-Cybernetics. Very popular book. Really, the idea of the book is around enhancing your self-image from a natural place. How do we actually shift how we see ourselves through visualization, through just belief, that type of thing. And it's a really profound book. And eventually, the individual named Matt Fury, who is, really the president of this organization. He was putting on a coaching certification for this program, and a part of me was like, there were sort of two sides of it. One was like, okay, this would be awesome because it's going to deepen my ability to really like understand this work. And at that time, there were quite a few people in the network that I had in the marketing space who knew about this book and were just, they saw it as a profound resource. So I was like, okay, this is great. Like, this could be an opportunity to get into this space to start to help people. So it's funny because,
So that
yeah,
thought was there already. That thought was there, like, I want to help people.
yes,
Okay. So it was not
yeah,
only just about I can learn more about this work for myself. There was this sense of service towards others that
absolutely.
maybe you hadn't named it, but this course kind of gave some kind of frame around which you could approach that, called, yeah, coaching
Yeah.
kind of thing. Okay.
Yes, and I think the really cool thing about myself is I started to just run with it. I put it out there in the world that I was like, hey, I did a coaching program in this program. I'd love to start coaching some people with some of the materials, and that was the start of me kind of launching onto this path of coaching. And then from there, there's much more I can share, but that was really like the catalyst of it all.
Yeah. And it set you forth towards taking clients and beginning, even over time, to begin to think about, okay, how can I make a living out of doing this? And then somewhere in there, you also then began to work with men. So it
Yes.
wasn't just this idea I could serve people in a general sense. It was connected to, how do I serve men? Am I getting that right?
Yeah, yeah. Thanks for sharing that. I mean, yeah, definitely. I guess that's the thing is that being that I was on this journey myself, and in that time period as well, I had discovered some of these resources around men's development, men's groups, that type of thing. It was sort of a natural place for me to step into, in terms of like I could put my own unique presence into this space. And you know I really look at it from the place of, it's just sort of a natural thing because I have been on my own journey, and in one sense my journey can be an example for others to look at. But then the beauty of coaching as well is that it really doesn't matter about your journey. You get to create the space for men to step
Mm,
into, and they really become the creators of their own journey. But I get to hold that space for them. That's such a gift. And so that absolutely, that's been, that was, it's sort of it's a two-part thing that's led me really into the depths of this men's work.
yeah. So somewhere in there, then, this thing called deep coaching showed up on your radar. Now, a little bit about how you stumbled across it.
Hmm.
But of course, given that you said, well, I've already had a coach training,
Yes.
what drew you in to the deep coaching work?
Yeah, I mean, so at that point, I was about probably 8 months into an accredited coach training program. Really fascinating program. It's called Accomplishment Coaching. Really focused on being based work, and yeah, being just that. I'll leave it at that. And um, about that time, another coach who's a mentor, like a mentor of mine, he actually recommended your book on his live show. And at that moment, I didn't really know much about A Shift in Being. I just, obviously, I got the recommendation. He spoke to how your book was very much focused on the transformation of being, and ontological work, right? Just, and again,
Yes.
ontological work being based work, simply what it is. And so I grabbed the book pretty quickly. I think it was just that, I grabbed the book, and immediately, as I was reading this book, I was like, this book is the missing piece to the coach training program that I am in. Because again, amazing things in this program, but my experience has been that in some of these coach training programs, there's a lot of talk about, okay, this is being based work, but there's sort of a layer of, I would say, success and achievement in it. Like, we need to establish practices. We need to establish forward movement in the coaching session. And some of that's probably my own stuff, right? But that's sort of the sense of the
And some
feel
of
that
it
I
is
got.
just the nature of coaching too, being
Yeah.
kind of forward moving method for personal change and growth. So there is always
Yes.
this eye to the future action orientation component of real of coaching, regardless of
Yes.
the form.
Yes. And I found that, again, it was a great structure for be deepening into coaching, but I found myself really, especially after reading your book, starting to really sit with, is the coaching space that I'm creating actually, is it actually supporting, it seems simple to say, but a shift in being in the individual, an actual transformational, breakthrough shift, or are we actually just taking, steps of betterment, steps of, creating a more
Mm.
successful individual? And that's the thing that really actually had me start to pursue, the Center for Transformational Coaching and the programs, because there was a different um, feel to this work. It really complemented well already the work that I had been doing.
Yes, but there was a different feel.
Yes.
Can you name that feel? I
Yeah. I
know that's
mean,
not easy necessarily, but
well, I mean,
I'd
I
like
think
to hear.
I think simply, when I speak to any of the programs within the center, the holding space, that's where I started as I was waiting to jump into the deep coaching intensive. Um, as I sit with, the question that you asked, the work within the center simply allows for two people to be in the space of the creation of being. And
Mm.
when it's the creation of being as the central focus of the coaching space, it allows for things like practices, achievement, taking steps forward. Those all become sort of the byproduct of
Mm.
somebody truly growing into their natural best self.
Right.
That's the experience that I've gotten from the center, is that um, those things don't matter as much in terms
Yes,
of the
but you're
space
right. I
that's
love the
being
word that
created.
you use. They become the byproduct in the sense that they're not absent from the process. We still will achieve things. We still will be exceptionally creative. All of that still happens. We will still do the things in our life, our high dreams, our high callings, our sense of purpose. But it flows from that orientation of core level beingness. And I know for a lot of folks, that's a little bit of a mystery what that really, really means. And some folks get a bit confused too as to, well, why am I even concerned about beingness? What does this even matter? So you went on a journey in the center to understand this. And I know that where you are today, having gone through both the deep coaching intensive and deepening practice, and you keep sending me these texts that say, Leon, I just had this session and this is what's changed and this is what's developed. So you're coming into an understanding yourself even of what it means to work with another human being or a group at a kind of core level of being, and looking at that must have been a bit of an evolution of understanding for you, from something
Absolutely.
that was, a little bit kind of, okay, what does this mean, to something that today I think you've really got a grasp on what that means. So, like, Can you share a little bit of that evolution of your understanding, so from where you began and kind of where you ended
Oh
up in that?
yeah. Well, I mean, and I think the beauty of it is that you know, as I even, you know, this, hopefully this makes sense, but like, so, you know, as of last July 2023, I would have hit the markers for what would be considered the professional coach certification with the International Coaching Federation. And in my perspective, it's like I figured out the process to like reach those markers in terms of like, this is how I need to show up in a coaching space and how I need to hold the space to be able to hit these markers. And you know, some of the things that were sort of mentioned to me as feedback has been like, Andrew, you lead too much in the space, you know, and
Mm,
things like that. Where I'm going with this is that, you know, I always have to sort of catch myself. um, I I very much believe that I have the wisdom to figure out like what the markers are for a quote unquote successful coaching conversation. And that was really, you know, it was like that was the space that was being created with this sort of deep transformational work that was in it, you know. And so it was still a beautiful space being created, and there was like a structure to it in a way, in some
mm,
sense, you know. Of course I could always sort of like break away from it. Where I've seen the evolution of myself in the coaching space, um, is really allowing myself to drop those structures that are needed, and that's
right.
challenging.
That's something you've
That's
mentioned to me a few times, is that
Yeah.
I can now drop structures that I used to think were really key to successful outcome in my conversations. And
Hmm.
now I feel I can let those go. It's
Yes.
like, okay, good. So first of all, you had to overcome some kind of a sense that these were so critical to outcome. And then you overcame that. But then in a sense, something replaced that. There was something that came into to fill that.
Yes. Yes. And I think that there was an awareness of this earlier in my coaching experience, but especially going through the DCI and then deepening practice is very much a being in the moment of the space with the client across me, the individual across from me, that um really sensing into what is needed in the space, you know, what and really it's kind of two parts, like one of like, yes, what is needed in the space, what is actually needed here. At times that might mean that it's not forward movement. At times that might mean
Mm,
and you know, what is forward movement, right? But like at times that might be actually sitting with pain, sitting with trauma, sitting with what's in the space for the individual, allowing them to vent and just being with them there. At other times, it might mean more of a forward movement or a, you know, a letting in of, you know, a new way of being, a new belief structure. So um, there's that piece of really sensing what's in the moment, and then if I speak to one more piece, I think I'll leave it at that for now. I mean, there's so much more I could speak to. You know, truly, like there's so many different elements from, you know, the deep coaching intensive and deepening practice that have really like just shifted how I create the space with my clients.
yeah. Yeah. I've been hearing those pieces from you over time, right? And the structural piece was a big one. The
Hmm.
leading piece was another one. And
Yes.
I know many coaches kind of fall into that belief that they need to be providing structure, content, ideas, perceptions, and that is how they then support the client to grow. And as you're learning in deep coaching, the core of the work is to help a person connect with their own deepest innate wisdom. And
Yes.
if we are creating a kind of noise around that, if you will, because of what we believe we need to bring, they're now listening to us, perhaps less than themselves. So the idea that we can create these spaces which are free in a sense of us and our agenda, or even us and our need to implant perceptions or have a person think a certain way or act a certain way because it would be beneficial to them if they did, based on our view, to be free of that and just to be what is for them
Hmm.
in a very trusting way. People can then connect with their core kind of self-concept, their core idea of who they are in this world. They can also begin to connect with, those are the ego structures that I've been carrying for a long time. These ones really limit me in some ways. These limiting beliefs or these false identity markers that I carry, they can connect with that. But then they can also begin to connect with a much higher realm of possibility for themselves. And we haven't had to do anything in that sense to have them go that direction. It's almost as though the space itself held, when we examine being level awareness, just the space can kind of do that work, or at least the space invites them to do the work for themselves and they begin to perceive of this higher realm. And so that's another piece I wanted to ask you about too, because one of the things that does differentiate deep coaching from many other modalities in the marketplace is simply that we do not shy away from spirituality. Now, that doesn't mean that we necessarily, again, as coaches, bring in the idea of spirituality and say, well, you, my client, need to be thinking about these things. It's not that at all. It's the recognition that we are part of something so much bigger, this
Hmm.
universal consciousness, if you will. I call it spirit with just a capital S. And this piece of it is kind of new for some folk. Not only those who are on their own personal journey and are coming into, sometimes a slow but dawning recognition that they have a spiritual nature, perhaps even some interest in understanding it. But from a coaching perspective as well, we're bringing some more of that into the equation. So when you first started kind of hearing this in the training and the coursework and started working with this idea of a partnership with spirit kind of ideation, what also then changed for you in the way that you were kind of conceiving of the coaching work or the conceiving of your own kind of journey? Like what changed for you in that?
Yeah, it's a great question. Um, you know, I think for me, it really was quite natural. Stepping into by the time I landed in the deep coaching intensive, um, the aspect of sort of a universal consciousness of spirit was quite sort of embodied in my life. We talked about it last week. A pivotal book for me in that was a book called Conversations with God from Neil
Yes.
Donald Walsh, which we
Yes.
talked about.
Yes.
And so stepping like that, for me, listening to that audiobook I listened to, it's like if you get all three books, it's like 30 hours. So it's you're getting quite an experience of it. And there's other, folks that I'd listened to as well. So stepping into the deep coaching intensive, it was quite a natural progression for me. It was a natural step into the space. But um, really standing for and creating a space where spirituality is or spirit is brought into the coaching space, um, I think it's just a really beautiful thing, through and through, because regardless of what somebody's religious beliefs are, universal beliefs, um, for the most part, it feels like most people can connect to this higher power, that there is some sort of higher energy, something that is here with us. Maybe we can't speak to it. Maybe we don't know what it is, but
Mm.
I get that sense from most people. And so for me, again, it was sort of a natural progression, bringing it into the coaching space. And then the thing that I love about this spiritual dynamic in deep coaching is that you combine that with really sensing what's in the moment with an individual. It's amazing. I've worked with individuals who are deep in Christian faith. And while I'm not at that same level of depth of Christian faith, we can have a conversation, from that universal consciousness. Or,
Yes.
I've had another client who is Buddhist, right? I know even less about Buddhism, but again, we are both connected to this universal consciousness. And the thing that I love about it is that it's really a sensing journey. We don't have to force it. We don't have to put pressure. We really just get to be in partnership to bring spirit into the space.
Yeah. And I love what you're pointing to as well there, this idea that it's not about religion. It's pointing to that which we all share in common. And it's the same experience for myself, having worked with people around the world from all faiths and backgrounds. This idea that we in the coaching space make room for spirit and spirituality as an energetic form, even as a conversational piece, doesn't mean that we have to have certain beliefs. We're touching that part of our humanity which we all share. And this is what I actually find the most delicious, if you will, about the work for myself, is that we're always coming in to our core human connections, what we share with each other. I know there are forms of coaching that talk about cross-culture coaching, for example, learn how to coach cross-culturally. And I think, well, that's exactly what we do all the time, because we don't look at the cultural pieces. When you get down to the core humanity that we all share, it just is that. And then, as you said, spirit often, for many people, especially on what we're calling the transformational journey, that great heroic journey into knowing the self as I am, the essence self, there's often a kind of dawning recognition of our purpose and place within a universal scheme, so to speak. Now, how we name that and label that, that's irrelevant. It's that each of us is kind of coming into that awareness. So I too love this piece of it, that we don't have to shy away from spirituality. So there's no room for it here. There's no room for it here. It's the essence of our human existence. So
Yes.
let's make all the room for it, and then notice what happens when we do. And so that was the other piece I wanted to ask you too, kind of in this vein of noticing what happens when we do. When you bring this work to men in your groups, or even in your one-to-one conversations, and you're sort of bringing more of this presence-based work, less of it being about, action and making change and achievement or attainment. When you're just really sitting with being, when you're much more allowing of just what's there in the moment to reveal itself, what are you noticing in the people you're working with and the men that you're working with? How do they receive this work?
So I would say, it's sort of on a scale, right? As you speak in the book, people are going to be at different levels of awareness and consciousness and readiness. I think, for the most part, the men that I work with, there has been they have been in this sort of deepening process for a while. They're seeing that there's more to life than what has been created to this point for themselves. So, um, I think, again, as I come back to your question, um, it can it can take a little while. It can take a few conversations for people to really really settle into the space that's being created. But then what I do find is that there's a real yearning for
Mm,
this type of space to be created. And as I mentioned before, in a space where not a lot of men are being supported and being seen in this way, to have a space where they can be themselves, they can share their fears, their frustrations, and there's not a layer of, okay, just go do this, and you'll be complete, of really getting to the heart of who they are. There just becomes more and more of a one trust being built in the space, and a real desire for more of this space to be created. I was talking with a client who completed a few months ago, And it was really interesting because we did some amazing work together. And one of the things that he spoke to in, one of our what I'd call an exit conversation was, um, how he really desired, like he he noticed, as because we had worked together for about 6 months, and so he really noticed that, in say month 4, that this depth of space was being created in the session, and he just desired more of it. He wanted to
Mm,
be in that space, and as we've left the coaching container, he's even mentioned, like, like, that was the thing that really stood out to me, was just that space that was created together.
right. Right. Now, that's an extraordinary thing, isn't it? When you think about it, we live in this world where so much is exalted when it is achievement oriented. Look at what we have achieved. Ah, and everyone can celebrate. Goodness has been done. But what you're saying is the goodness didn't come from something that was attained, milestones crossed, markers hit. It came from the space, just the space, right? Now that is for some will just be like, how is it? How can it just be the space? Like, well, there's two coming into the space, and our role, as you know, is to create that space. So it's so much then our presence, how we show up from the core of ourselves in that moment, and how we can just hold. We call hold this, you mentioned the course holding space, but that's it, is to hold the space. Now, in that holding, a lot can happen in the conversation, in the way it moves, the energies that flow. But our role is just to hold it. And then start to notice that when people feel incredibly held, and we've invoked this idea that we are being held by not just me, the coach, but something much greater that stands in service of our betterment, that stands in service of our enlightenment, that stands in service of us truly expressing our highest selfhood. When we understand that this is part of something so much bigger, the space seems to even amplify in power, right? And then, oh my goodness, I've noticed as a coach too that suddenly how much more easeful things can be. I no longer need to think, oh, was this session of value? Did we take the right turns in this to help them think the right way so that they could make the right decisions to do this? Did I provide value? Did they get that breakthrough moment? Was there an aha that happened? Oh, so I can feel, good about my coaching.
Yeah.
Like, all of that just falls away, right? It's simply known that when the space is held in this way, they are being impacted at levels of mind, being, consciousness, even at a cellular level that, although unseen, is immensely impactful.
Hmm.
And when I say unseen, it's not that it's just visible to us, right? Cannot just see what's transpiring at a core level of mind and consciousness, but something profound is at play that goes beyond what the conversation in that moment even reveals.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's, and I do hear, especially beginner coaches and newer coaches who, there is these sort of questions that come up, like, am I providing value to the space? How did this coaching session go? And of course, that still shows up for me. I think more from a place of really, really holding the deepest possible space for people. Like, that's kind of how it shows up for me. And um the really cool thing with that is that, there is, again, from these years of coaching, I've gotten to a place now, especially through the deep coaching work, and, obviously, as I've continued this work with you, where a part of being coach is trusting, again, this thing that I spoke to a couple of times in the conversation, of really trusting what's in the moment, and
Mm,
trusting that the space that is being created between you and the client, that that's what's needed. And I still, especially now, one of the things that I've um, I've been practicing with my clients as we've sort of moved into the deep coaching space a bit more. And again, we're sort of gauging, based, on where we're at in our coaching process. But I check in with them, and it's not checking in from a place of like, "Hey, am I providing you enough value?" But actually from a place of like, "How is this experience for you?" You know, and really just being in that partnership of what are you desiring in the space, and you know meeting them there, but also standing for, again, that sort of higher level of transformation for that individual. And so
Yes.
it's such a beautiful thing, right? Because again, I'm a human being. There's going to be times where I wonder how a coaching session has gone, we'll say. But there's also there's a trust within myself knowing that that was exactly where I needed that's exactly where it needed to be. What was
Right.
created, what was created, and we get to continue from here. And there's magic to that. There's magic to being an individual that can represent that in the world.
Isn't that something to say? There's magic
Hmm.
to being the individual that can represent that in the world, because it's not being represented in the
Hmm.
mass kind of way, right? We're talking really about little outposts on the edge of humanity where these things are happening. Certainly, I haven't noticed it being the headline on today's daily news.
Hmm.
A whole lot of other kind of spaces are being created and experienced in that way. And here, what we're talking about is a space in which our essence humanity can reveal itself to another person who is resting in their essence humanity. And coming back to this idea of when do I feel like I'm questioning the value I provided, is when I know in a session I'm not connected to my essence humanity.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
when I am in that within myself, there's never a question. I mean, you could ask, could it have gone differently? Yes, I
Hmm.
suppose it could have. But was anything off? No, because I was where I needed to be, rock solid, grounded in my essence humanity, and then experiencing, to whatever degree they're ready to reveal, their own essence humanity. And that's where the magic comes in. And I'm quite sure that people who are not necessarily in the field of working with other human beings may not ever really experience what we're talking about. I
Yes.
mean, there are moments when it is so utterly beautiful, where the light is so extraordinary. I mean, I'm talking about the radiant light of self kind of coming through, and how it just amplifies in the space. It's so beautiful that my mind just cannot even grasp what is actually, the impact of that across all of humanity.
Mm.
It's not just for us. And this is what, I've said this to you so many times. What happens in the coaching space in those moments, it seems like it might just be for, well, here's coach and here's client, and it's for them. It's not. What happens in that space is for all. So
Yes.
there's this ripple through all of humanity the moment that two human beings connect with each other at that essence level, reveal it, and revel in that brilliance that is there. Right? To me,
Mm.
that's the essence of the work, and what really makes it magical and transformative ultimately.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's one piece that I'm glad that you spoke to, because I wanted to speak to it in this conversation. I think one of the things that you've really modeled through the DCI and deepening practice has been really being seeing the context, seeing the world that that your client or a person that you're in conversation with is in. And again, I will take ownership of this on my side in terms of, you know, I've probably kind of, as I was starting in the coaching journey, sort of saw the distinction between coach and client.
Mm,
The coach is sort of attempting to step into the world of the client, but there's sort of this separation. And my experience from the DCI and deepening practice has been more and more of this deepening of really being in that oneness, of
Yes.
really connecting with this individual who I'm with, so that we're truly in partnership. There's no separation. There's no coach and client. There's just two people in the space working together,
Yes.
to create this next chapter in this person's life. And again, I truly, like, you've modeled that for me. And I kind of laugh to myself, as I've gone through this experience where, um, there's been waves. There's been sort of this wave of like, okay, do I feel like I'm here? Do I feel like I'm off track? And not even that matters, but it's taken going through the DCI and completing the deepening practice and just being in the space with you and the other coaches to really start to sense that, like, oneness, and
Yes.
really understand what does that actually mean to be in oneness together, because there is a difference between the intellectual understanding of it and the
Mm,
actual heart based, being based. We are one. We are
yes.
partners in this together.
Yes. Absolutely right. And when that can fall away, this idea of I have a role as coach and you as client, when that begins to fall away, ah, then we can do the real work. I'm no longer observing you and just, yeah, I always like to say I'm observing you. Like I'm over here and here's your little life happening. I'm like observing this life and I'm questioning this life and I'm asking about it and and there's this distinction of me and you separate versus that image of me being in your life. Like I'm in there
Yes.
with you. We're sharing that reality together. And it doesn't mean I've had to have all the experiences you have had, but I love it when my clients feel like I'm kind of gently asking them to take me into their life, and they allow me to inhabit their world. And there's this real sense of like I'm no longer the coach, I'm now in this world with you, and we're kind of co-sensing the emerging potentials together. And that's a very, very different position for a coach. Whereas, typically we're trained to hold the role of the coach. And yes, we can be curious about our client's life, but that curiosity is really just to serve the coaching process, which is very different than the desire to sort of help sort of inhabit their world so we can coach from within it, not
Hmm.
as the observer of them on their little, treadmill kind of running. And we just, why are you doing that?
You got your clipboard as you're taking notes.
Exactly. Right. Exactly. And I believe, from all the years of doing this as well, that people respond to that readily.
Hmm.
It's because judgment falls away. It's only this innate desire to be with and experience with and share the common humanity. And that's, as we said earlier, is when what we're calling the magic happens. That's when the sessions will end and you just sit there in this energetic field wondering what just happened,
Mm.
not sure how you got there, but wow, huh, I feel as alive and as energized as my clients do. And we both go into our day a little bit more lit up from within, a little lightness in our step, right?
Yeah.
Smile on our face, and that's how we carry it into the world. That's extraordinary. Yeah. Yeah. So thank you. You've been a phenomenal student of the work. I've just absolutely enjoyed your energy, your presence, your questions. So many questions, but all in that desire to understand and to watch you progress over this time. It's just been fantastic for me as a teacher
Mm.
to see this, because for me, I know from seeing so many others, like I said, I know the impact the work has. But I don't always get to see people through the full spectrum as I've been able to see you, because of our proximity and the fact that we can have these conversations with more regularity than I have with others. And just to be able to see that impact on your life kind of along the way has been really rewarding for me.
Hmm.
So as we kind of close our conversation here, any final thoughts, anything you would just like to share about yourself, your work, an invitation to something, it's open.
Well, first of all, thank you. I mean, thank you for just that acknowledgement. I mean, it's been a real gift, to be in this space with you, and I feel so grateful that that the stars aligned and that we ended up in the same city together. I'm so thankful for that, because um, you've truly, you've changed my life in terms of this work. And it's so exciting because I have many, many more years to be able to
Yes.
bring this to the world and be representative of this work. And I just feel so grateful for that, because as you spoke to, right, one conversation at a time,
Mm,
being able to share this gift with others, it creates ripples in the world. And that's
yeah.
very much in alignment of the purpose that I see for myself in this world, is to have that impact.
Yeah.
And so, this has been a catalyst for that. And I'm excited about what other opportunities will come up in the future within the
Oh,
TCC, in terms of the educational component and just being able to support others. So thank you for that. And then in terms of, people are interested to find out about, the work that I'm doing. Yeah, I've got a website, very simple. It's my name. It's andrewmundy.com. I have coaching services there, and I'm also going to be starting to do mentor coaching which will be available on that website as well, if people are interested. But and even outside of that, if people are just curious about this work, and they have questions about any of the programs, I'm happy to speak to them and support them, because again, I've done the holding space, I've done the deep coaching intensive, I've done
yeah.
deepening practice, and Leon will know I'm constantly on him about what's next. Where else do we get to take this journey? And
Yeah.
I truly stand behind the work of the center.
And do you have a men's program coming up in the fairly near future? Yeah, near
I
soon.
do,
Something.
yeah. So same thing, for those, if somebody was curious about those programs, just go on my website. The information will be there in terms of future
Perfect.
offerings.
Perfect. andrewmundy.com. Perfect.
Yeah.
I love you're just getting started. I mean, this is what I find fascinating. I've been in the coaching business for 20 years now, and you're, just 4 to 5 into it.
Yes.
Your impact is already felt, and it's just going to grow.
Yeah.
There's only one place for it to grow. You're going to have an
Yes.
amazing life ahead of you in service of other human beings, because I mean, really at the core, what else is there to do with their time but to serve each other at the core level? So thank you for joining me today, Andrew, for being
Thank
here.
you.
And for all of you who are watching this, thanks very much for your time, your energy, your presence. You can always learn more about the work that we do at the Center for Transformational Coaching website, www.centerfortransformationalcoaching.com. We're always happy to hear from you. So with that, I will say goodbye and good night from this corner of the world. Bye.
Bye, everyone.